The personal relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama has been, much discussed since both men came into office. And clearly, although I think there's been efforts to improve the relationship, obviously last year President Obama went to Israel on a well-received visit. I think that helped their personal relations somewhat. Nevertheless, it's pretty clear that neither man appears to like each other very much, and I don't think trust each other very much, which is even more crucial in this respect. So clearly, I think on a personal level, there's a poor relationship there. But I think the issues between the United States and Israel at the moment go beyond this issue of personalities. I think, it's easy to ascribe this to Obama's coolness or Bibi's temperament, but I think there are deeper issues at stake which are affecting the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, one immediately would conclude that there are generally shared interests more than differences at the highest level of policy. So what's going on here? How does Israel see the way that the U.S. conducts policy in this that causes concern for Israel and vice versa?
Well, I think it is important to acknowledge, first of all, that they do share, broadly speaking, common goals in the region, particularly in terms of preventing Iran from going nuclear and generally countering Iran's regional influence. Now increasingly a concern about countering al-Qaeda and jihadist groups in the region and supporting kind of these pro-Western regimes such as Jordan's. So they do have these common interests, but I think that what we're seeing increasingly is disagreements and maybe fundamental disagreements over how to achieve these common goals. Both sides, while they share these interests, both sides believe that the other is the policies that they're pursuing in pursuit of those interests are actually undermining their own interests. So I think I think part of what's happening is that on the Israeli side, there is a perception, and I want to emphasize this is just a perception rather than necessarily the reality. The perception is that the Obama administration's policies in the region are undermining Israel, particularly because they are perceived to be weak. The Obama administration is seen as being timid in its approach to the region, particularly in its willingness or apparent willingness to use military force. The perception was that when it came to enforcing Obama's red line over Syria, for instance, that the U.S., he was, climbed down quite quickly, and that signaled to perhaps Iran that the United States, under Obama, is not willing to use its military force. That's one concern. And more generally, a kind of feeling that the Obama administration is looking for a way out of the region. It's this much discussed pivot toward Asia-Pacific region, and a fear in Israel that the Obama administration is beginning to kind of, or wants to at least disengage, and that's going to leave Israel isolated. So I think there's that general concern about Obama administration's policy. And on the Obama administration side, a concern that Israel really doesn't have a strategy, right? Doesn't really even have a coherent foreign policy. There's all domestic politics. And that, even when the Obama administration is making efforts to help Israel, as it believes it's doing right now with regards to the Palestinians in the peace process, what it's getting in return is a kind of, a very disdainful and even disrespectful attitude. And there's a sense, I think this was voiced by the former Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, that the Netanyahu government and Netanyahu himself is ungrateful for the kind of American support that the Obama administration has given Israel, and that this is affecting the American interests as well. So there's these general perceptions that neither side is really receptive enough to the concerns of the other. And is in some ways, through its policies and through its actions, undermining those interests. Of course, in addition to those general concerns, there's also very specific disagreements when it comes to the two main issues that the United States and Israel deal with, which is Iran and the nuclear issue and the Palestinian issue.